For those that have fortunately repressed this, there are lots of clear parallels to see between Dead Space 3 and Resident Evil 6. Resi 6 was the culmination of over a decade-long push towards a more action-orientated style of Resident Evil. Solely because Capcom thought it could, and should, compete with blockbusters like Call of Duty and Gears of War. But of course, it was never going to sell as well as those titles, so Capcom considered it a total failure by association, which is exactly what EA did with Dead Space 3. Instead of supplying a reasonable budget for the now respected horror franchise, Electronic Arts thought it'd be a good idea to crowbar in a heavier focus on action and ridiculously over-the-top set pieces. And when DS3 inevitably failed to make all the money in the world ever, EA scrapped the franchise, as well as the development studio behind it, for good measure. Luckily for us, not only has that not stopped EA recently announcing a reboot for the series, more tantalizingly, it didn't deter original series creator Glenn Schofield from working towards a spiritual successor in the form of the upcoming Callisto Protocol. But all this talk of revitalizing the long-dead franchise got me thinking about the game that ended it all, and whether it could have really been that awful. Was Dead Space 3 a truly bad game, or just unfortunate enough to come after the two previous horror classics? Let's answer the ominous distress signal and find out. Before we go any further, guys, I just really want to say a quick thank you to all of you that have been supporting the channel. We're almost at 2,000 subscribers now, and while I know that's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, I still deeply love and appreciate all of you that have helped not only this channel, but myself grow over the past, I think, year and a bit now. It really does mean the world to me. Anyway, no more sappiness, let's get on with the video. The intro to Dead Space 3 wastes absolutely no time introducing its slicker, action-packed style of gameplay. While previous entries in the series opened to an atmospheric build-up filled with tension and body horror, Dead Space 3 opts for in-your-face action through the dystopian streets of a random space city. Instead of watching helplessly as innocent NPCs are torn apart in many hideous ways, you'll be crossing a busy road. Oh, and also gunning down dozens of armed goons along the way. You know, all the normal typical horror game stuff. Facetiousness aside though, it's actually a surprisingly well thought out sequence that does a good job of introducing the newer, different approach to gameplay, even if it's not what most players expected or even wanted. It's also during this prologue that we're introduced to DS3's Dastardly villain. His name is Jacob Danik, and he is every generic monologuing villain you've ever seen before. They give him all the cliche bad guy moments, the most egregious of which is a pathological need to gloat before just simply killing the protagonist. They even use the classic, tried and tested lazy writing method of supposedly making you hate the villain by having him blow up the previously mentioned random city that you know completely nothing of, and also just don't care about. Based on what I've told you about Jacob, it's probably fairly easy to guess what his motivation is. For those that really don't even care enough to think about Dead Space 3's antagonist, honestly jealous of you guys, he obviously wants to help the necromorphs because God or evolution or some other bollocks that can be summed up with the dude is lame and vague enough to fit in perfectly alongside any other pretentious, crappy Far Cry villain. After we inevitably get bored of listening to Danik, Isaac escapes, and we spend the rest of the game scavenging through seemingly endless hallways. Unfortunately for us, residing in those hallways are an array of nasty monsters itching to tear our head off and infect our body. All the usual suspects are here. such as the classic slashers, as well as the slightly altered versions of the lurkers and exploders. It's the new additions, however, that really help DS3 stand out from the previous two entries. The fodder are humanoid in appearance, but after taking enough damage, will split in half, leaving only a pair of legs with 3 spiked intestine tentacles flailing about violently. There's also the Swarm, which are a morphed version of the Swarmer and Infector from Dead Space 2. These little bastards will scurry around reanimating corpses to attack Isaac, forcing him, i.e. the player, to destroy any nearby bodies before becoming overwhelmed. And last, but almost definitely not least, is the Hunter. These guys are sort of like Resident Evil 4's Regenerators, if they were on speed. That would be bad enough if it wasn't for the fact that they're practically unkillable, leaving the only option of desperately running away for fear of having your face sliced off. On a quick side note, it's no coincidence that I'm once again comparing this game to RE4. There are far more familiarities to Capcom's timeless classic than just the Hunter. Small features like the random scattering of QTEs seem solely included because, well, Resident Evil did it. The entire shift in gameplay and tone seems to be a direct reaction to the RE series shifting towards action above horror. And woefully, this leads to my biggest whinging point about Dead Space 3. While I fully understand the desire to sprinkle on-rails action set pieces throughout the campaign, I don't understand why they had to be this shit. Every single one is nauseating, and 90% of the time I found myself getting killed by things I couldn't even see. Sometimes it seems like you've hit an object you were supposed to avoid, but in actual fact, there's no possible way of avoiding it. And again, I get the point is to add tension and believability to the moment, yet I can't help but feel like I've been locked out of the game and things are just happening to me instead of with me. In a similar vein, any section that makes use of the rocket boots is slow, boring, and sucks ass. A lot of these issues mostly manifest themselves throughout the early section of the game, and the second you crash land and enter the snowy sections that make up the majority of Dead Space 3's playtime, it really kicks into gear. Which is why it's a shame it takes so long to reach this point. Horror in the snow is what Dead Space 3 primarily has to offer that is conceptually fresh and unique. So why do we need to spend 8 whole chapters pissing around on a spaceship playing Dead Space Lite? I honestly believe that Dead Space 3 would have been received better if it had just cut to the chase and totally embraced its new direction. And it's not only the changing location that kicks the game up a notch. Once the second half of the campaign settles in, we get to see the experimental weapon altering mechanics in full swing. I'm not sure what the general consensus was on the weapon modifications, but frankly, I love them. Much like many other aspects of the early game, it starts off kind of crap and pointless, but once the game starts to give you the parts and schematics to play around with, it's possibly the most enjoyable feature of the game for me. The options are hardly endless, but there's consistent encouragement to keep trying different mashups until you finally craft the perfect weapon to suit your style. And being able to share parts plus materials with a co-op partner positively helps promote the idea that you are in this together. Speaking of being in this together, it became quite clear from the get-go that Dead Space 3 was created with co-op at the forefront of its design, so I couldn't possibly discuss my thoughts on the game without bringing in my co-op partner in life to help break it down properly. And just like the character randomly does in Dead Space 3's cutscenes, my co-op partner has suddenly appeared from out of nowhere.
Hi.
So as a whole game, Did you like Dead Space 3?
I liked the aesthetics and I liked playing it. I really wanted to like it, but I was struggling with it. But I think that was mostly because it was making me feel really dizzy. Something about the motion of the game was making me nauseous.
It does have a really stilted third person. There's a lot of motion blur going on.
I did really enjoy the game. It was quite fun to play. The creatures were quite fun to kill, and there were some fun little sections.
It's interesting for you because it's the only Dead Space game you've played.
Yes, that is true. I've owned all 3 for a long time because I got them given to me, but I never got into them.
So, as someone who's just played Dead Space 3, did you find it spooky?
Yeah, some sections were spooky. I didn't think it was scary as in horror, but it was fine. It was fun. It was action-y, which is kind of okay. I feel like it's hard to get a horror co-op game, and I think because they were kind of edging more for the co-op, it just ended up more action-y naturally.
I can't think of any horror co-op games.
Not
I can
ones
think
that
of them,
are
but not
actually
good
horror.
ones, yeah.
That's the point. All co-op horror games, in quotation marks, are always kind of more actiony because I don't think you can get those scares. I don't know what it was. I can't remember what game we were playing, although it might have been Dead Space, it might have been something else. But I remember we were walking through stuff and one of us was getting jump scares and the other one wasn't.
That's this one,
There
yeah.
you go. Well,
Well, it wasn't really jump scares, but you were...
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
No.
No, because I know what section you're thinking of, but there was... I can't remember what we've played recently, but there was something. This is really random.
I will search high and low to find
figure
this
out.
mystery horror game that probably isn't that scary.
Probably isn't real. I might have dreamt this because I have really mundane
It
dreams.
sounds like a good game.
It wasn't because the issue... Well, no, it was fun, but the issue was only one of us was getting jump scares.
So you think it was a bug, not a...
No, because like one of us was further ahead than the other, so one of us would get the thing happen and the other one wouldn't see it because they were too far behind. I don't know what game it was. It might have been this one.
I will search high and low and find footage of this game.
Whoa.
Even if you've dreamed this
I might
terrible
have.
game.
But my point is, it's hard for set pieces to happen very well unless it's straight in a cutscene, which is never as scary.
It's difficult enough for a game designer to drive one player forward into a direction they're supposed to go.
Yeah.
Doing it with 2. And especially in a game like this, because this game's like, I don't know, what, like 8 hours, 10 hours long? Pretty standard length. It's longer than most games.
Yeah.
Probably ends up taking about 15 in co-op because you just end up waiting for the other person to finish doing their stuff.
Exactly, yeah. Especially because I love looting. Anything I can loot, I will loot.
You love looting, and I love making weapons. So we're
Yeah.
consistently just waiting for each other. Question number 2 is someone who's never played Dead Space before. Do you give a shit about Isaac Clarke?
I couldn't tell you which one was Isaac Clarke. I imagine it's the main guy.
I believe your name is Sam Carver.
I guess. They are just normal, random, generic dudes to me.
Classic straight white
Classic
protagonists.
Straight white protagonists, exactly.
You gotta love them. They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. We don't have enough.
We need more. More specifically straight white protagonists. Now.
Yeah, so basically no. I don't care.
That is, I think, a clear failing of the game. Because in the first game, he is just placeholder. Here's a man. This man could be you. Because he's straight and white. It could be you.
Yeah.
Dead Space 2 gives him a bit more. And he's a straight white man that isn't you.
Oh, man.
He's another person.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Groundbreaking.
So in Dead Space 3, you would hope they build on that even more.
There's not really a huge amount of story that I care about. Like, there was cutscenes and all that, but I wasn't paying attention. So it's like, I enjoy the gameplay, I don't necessarily care about the story.
Linking back to that thing we were confused about earlier, the weird psychological horror parts of the game where your character was seeing visions, they were seeing birthday parties and illusions of children and creepy shit, and I was just stood around going, cool.
Yeah, I love that concept, but it must be really boring for the other person.
It is a fundamentally flawed concept because 50% of the people playing are not having fun.
Yeah, I don't know what they could really change to that to make it more interesting. And also, there doesn't really feel like there's much conclusion to it. It just kind of ends.
A lot of those sections are just kind of, you get some loot at the end, and you crack on pretty much instantly that the second guy just has some issues with his kid being dead, probably.
Yeah.
That's a slight spoiler. The second it starts, you get that's what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't take much detective work.
It kind of works because obviously we play next to each other, so it kind of works in that sense because you can see one person doesn't have it on their screen and one person does. But if you're playing on headsets, one person is just having a normal game and the other one's like, what the hell's going on? Do you see this? And it's just like, no.
My original experience with it, actually makes me think it's better that way round.
Really?
Because, I mean, it's difficult because I went into it knowing what was going to happen. But sat next to you, you go, hey, look at this weird thing. And I go, yeah, that is a bit weird.
I guess, yeah.
But I was playing this with my friend and we didn't know this was going to happen. But it was like, oh, this is weird, isn't it? I'm like, okay, you mean the big coffin things? And he's like, what are you on about? I'm like, the big coffin things? He's like, no, I'm talking about the giant nutcrackers. What the fuck are you on about? And that was a fun kind of
Communication.
figuring out that we were both like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, I guess maybe that's true.
They could have done more with it, I think. I think that could have been more. That could be an interesting indie horror game co-op experience in and of itself.
Yeah, like a We Were Here vibe. Go watch our We Were Here video. It's very
Reppin'.
old.
Original classics.
Yeah.
Deep cut references for the 10 people that have watched us for longer than a week. I think one of the bits the co-op does best, and it's where I very much found it clear that this was meant for co-op and not for single player. And it's when you're doing puzzles and being attacked at the same time. In single player, you just have to keep killing them until they stop, and then you're allowed to do the puzzle.
Yeah.
In co-op, the puzzle doesn't pause the game, so one has to do it while the other defends. And that adds an element because these puzzles are basic shit. They're not complex, they're not difficult. But it is kind of fun doing the puzzle and just seeing every now and again your co-op partner run through while a necromorph runs after them.
That is quite good. It adds a little bit of humour to it, which I guess is probably not what it's supposed to
It's not
be adding.
unintentional.
But it's fun. Although sometimes, I might be wrong, but if I remember correctly, once you're in the puzzles, you can't get back out. Or maybe that was just one of the puzzles that we got stuck in. But I remember being dead on the floor whilst you were stuck in a puzzle or vice versa. And you just ended up getting killed.
It doesn't end up as funny after you keep dying because of it.
No.
It loses that sense of humour very quickly.
For me, the big thing that I do enjoy, because I do enjoy this in all games, I love snow. There needs to be more games in the snow.
Snow. I didn't put snow in my notes.
Snow's good.
Location is, maybe I'll mention it a bit, but location is top notch.
It's key. It's important.
Say what you want. They've changed the formula, they've changed the game, it's not a good game, whatever, but more games in snow, please, because it's always great.
Honestly, I actually think that's one of the big reasons I really enjoy the We Were Here games, because it is in snow. I'm sorry I'm bringing it up again. I love snow. Snow makes me happy. Makes me feel cold and isolated and spooked.
And on that very, very critical thinking note, very high art reasoning for why Dead Space 3 is the best Dead Space game. That's a fact. You can't. It's snow.
Yeah, snow.
Yeah. On that note, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
You can go back to playing games that are good, like Red Dead or Stardew, or that game where you ride around on the giant fucking cats.
Oh, that is good.
And I'm going to go back to trying to convince myself and other people that this game is actually good, actually.
Bye.
While it might feel different to DS1 and 2, the hard-hitting, brutal melee combat, satisfying dismemberment, and meticulous attention to level design are all very much still present. They just didn't entirely know where these aspects were best placed. And that left us with a game flailing around trying to appease too many different audiences. So do I think Dead Space 3 deserves a second chance? I don't know. I do know though that I like it and I had fun playing it. It'll never be considered as a classic like its two predecessors, but in a decade where the industry was obsessed with copying Gears of War and perfecting constant loading screens masquerading as elevators, I don't just think Dead Space 3 deserved better, I think it was better than you think it is. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for checking out this video, guys. Were you a hater of Dead Space 3 back in the day, or are you a DS3 apologist like me? Are you looking forward to the Callisto Protocol, or even EA's Dead Space reboot? Let us know any and all of your thoughts down in the comments, we'd love to hear them. And like I said up top, we've nearly hit 2k subscribers thanks to all of you amazing people. So if you did want to help support the channel and help us reach that goal, we would very much appreciate that. Or even if you just left a like. You've watched the video, I'm already over the moon that you got this far. Thank you again for watching, and cheers.